Alright, so once again we're going to be doing an armaments video, this time covering the new armaments that came as part of the Railjack update. So here we are in the dry dock with the Shield of Ire and Mag Prime. So in a video previously we've looked at some of the old armaments, obviously we're looking at some of the new armaments. These are of course the weapons that you can use when you're in the pilot seat or in fact the gunner seat as well. Now before we do anything, we're just going to have a look at the avionics grid that I'll be using for these weapons. This is a sort of full gunner build. It might not be your full gunner build, so you're more than welcome to play around with it and come up with a potentially better solution. But either way, Onslaught Matrix I think is probably the one that makes the most sense because it's obviously extra damage with your turrets as an aura. We're also going to be using Crimson Fugue instead of something like Hyperstrike. Yes, Hyperstrike gives you more damage right from the get-go, but it seems like because of how easy Railjack is to begin with, Crimson Fugue just gives even more value because it's quickly getting you those 5 stacks is very simple, and then of course you can get even more damage than Hyperstrike itself. The amount comes out to somewhere close to the 150 range. I think it's about 144% damage. Don't quote me on that though, I'm just doing some really quick math. We're also using Predator for extra crit chance and Section Density for extra crit damage because you really don't want to go for one without the other. That seems to be the way to go. We're also using Fortifying Fire and Defensive Fire so that we can keep our shields up, and that is of course going to give us some extra damage through the use of Protective Shots, i.e. our turret damage will be higher so long as our shields are above that 75% range. We're also going to use turret velocity just cause. You're more than welcome to swap this with something like Hyperstrike if you so desire. That is entirely up to you, but I feel like just for this purpose we'll just stick to using turret velocity. If you're good at this using guns like I am usually, then turret velocity is unnecessary. You can actually just use Hyperstrike instead. And then finally I have Ripload here just because I don't really have anything else worth putting on a dash polarity at the moment, so we're just going to use Ripload here for the time being. So like my previous armaments video, we're going to be focusing mainly on the Mark III stats of every single weapon that came with the Railjack update. That way we're not dicking around with Mark 1 and Mark 2 because generally speaking you won't really be using them anyway. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first weapon we're going to be looking at is the Glazio. So here are the different Mark III Glazios that are available. Note the high base damage as well as the super high crit rate. Now unlike its original counterpart, i.e. the Cryophon, I can actually recommend this weapon. It's still a bit slow when it comes to taking out things like space bubbles, so you may want to pair it up with a fast-firing weapon like a Talyn. But keep in mind though, this is only really a thing if you happen to be in Grenier space. Now, in the current form of Railjack, you're able to one-shot everything, but that's not that terribly difficult to be honest. Especially using a full gunner build, you can actually one-shot everything with, hell, even a Carcinox and possibly even a Photor. So either way, that's not that big of a deal. The main thing is that it does come with puncture procs, and like I said previously, puncture procs are actually plasma procs, i.e. they can actually strip armor and shields as well. If you want to actually do that though, you may want to use the Levan one obviously because that does bring a lot more status chance than the other variants, but honestly at this particular moment in time, stripping armor and introducing damage multipliers is only really something that you'll need if Steel Path Railjack ever comes out, and at the same time if DE actually makes Railjack missions full of Railjack as opposed to full of normal missions, then at that point you may actually want to use the Levan type. But otherwise, sticking with the Zeki type is always a really good option. The next weapon that we're going to be looking at is the Vort. So here are the different Mark III Vorts that are available. Note the high base damage for a fast firing weapon. Now, for reference, the Carcinox and the APOC, they have 3-digit base damage, whereas the Vort has 4-digit base damage, so that's of course going to be very strong. Now, for the time being, I can actually recommend this weapon, but keep in mind it's only pure electric damage, so at some point, especially if Steel Path Railjack comes out, that's going to make it quite unuseful. So we'll just have to see what happens in regards to that. Because the status proc is a scramble, I would probably avoid high status chance on this weapon, honestly, because scramble does make things a little bit more difficult to hit, i.e. if a fighter ship was already going in a straight line, scramble actually makes it go up and down, left and right. That really screws around with your aiming, so I would probably avoid that as much as possible. Ultimately, this actually feels like a far more interesting APOC. Now keep in mind the Vort is also like a Fluctus type weapon, i.e. you're actually shooting out lines of energy, so even if you sort of slightly miss, if you happen to end up hitting the fighter ship with it being in the middle of the two large balls, then generally speaking it's actually going to end up killing that fighter ship, no problem. The next weapon of course is going to be the Laith. So here are the different kinds of Laiths that are available for the Mark III variants. Note the high base damage as well as the pretty decent crit rate as well. These are essentially double shotgun auto turrets, so that makes them very, very interesting weapons. They shoot out shrapnel, so the status chance that you see on these Laiths, they work with shotgun logic, i.e. it's a status per shrapnel, so that makes it very, very interesting. I've done the math. You basically have a 68% chance of getting at least one status proc if you're using something like the Z-keyed Laith, so there we go. Now the Laiths having full IPS actually makes them pretty strong. The impact doesn't actually mean anything because it's concuss. I'm not entirely sure what it does honestly, but it seems to not be terribly useful just from the flavor text itself. Although it can still strip armor through the use of puncture, i.e. plasma procs, and it can also increase incoming damage through the use of slash, i.e. particle procs. So that makes them very, very strong. So definitely recommend this weapon regardless of whether or not Steel Path Railjack comes out. Just being able to do that just basically means you can increase the amount of damage that a target takes. Now ultimately this is a solid weapon, but it is a shotgun, so I would probably treat it as such. If you're trying to fire at a fighter ship or hell even a cruise ship that is far away, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. You want to get in nice and close, or at least get your pilot to get in nice and close. That way you can do a lot of damage through the use of these shotgun-like pellets. So basically close ship-to-ship combat, if that is your goal, if that is your speed, then this is the weapon for you. And the final weapon is going to be the Talyn. So here are the stats for the Talyns that we have available, the Mark III ones of course. Note the high fire rate and the status chance as well. Now, here's the thing about the Talyns, they are straight up hit scan weapons. So it's like using a photon, it's like using a pulsar. They're hit scan weapons with 100% accuracy. That makes them pretty damn strong. They also have a bit of a spool up time, so they do start off firing a bit slower, but once you keep firing, they actually speed up. So that's basically how that works. Because they are a hit scan weapon, if you pair this with a gunner crewman, they actually do a lot of damage because the gunner crewmen are already aimbots by themselves. So if you, of course, put an aimbot with a weapon that has 100% accuracy and is hit scan, well, guess what? Everything on the map pretty much dies more or less instantly, and you get to just see them blow up just by themselves without you actually doing anything. So that is, of course, a very, very powerful option if you so desire. If that's basically what you want to do, which is nothing, I guess, then there you go. The Talyns being used with crewmen are going to be a very powerful option. But that being said though, I wouldn't really recommend this weapon as a go-to weapon, and this is because this weapon is pure heat damage. Now, this is not the kind of heat damage that you and I know from normal gameplay. This is incendiary damage that you and I may know from Railjack missions. Incendiary damage doesn't strip armor. That's the deal. It does give that damage over time though, so whilst the damage over time is usually pretty low, generally speaking what happens with damage over time if you pair it with something like a Bane mod is that you end up double dipping. So perhaps the damage over time using something like Worm's Torment might be satisfactory, you'll just have to see. But we can always find out by using it against a cruise ship, but that's probably not a good idea anyway, because you know, you're not supposed to really use a gun against a cruise ship, you're supposed to use the forward artillery against the cruise ship, so I wouldn't really recommend that either. But otherwise, because it is a very, very fast-firing weapon, it can, of course, pop those bubbles really easily in Grenier space, so that is definitely something that you can use on top of something like a Glazio, for example, if you so desire. So that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. Now, what Railjack gun would you prefer? Would you still prefer one of the old Railjack guns from the Grenier space, or would you actually prefer one of the new Railjack weapons coming from the Corpus space? Let me know in the comments if you're sticking to one of the new ones or one of the old ones. Let's just see what people reckon. I might actually put up a poll later on. I don't know. We'll just find out. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Railjack action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.